This is the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Welcome back. Here on Wednesday, September 18th, 2019. It's a Wednesday, but there are a ton of things going on in sports right now. But one of the biggest is Cam Newton and his injury status for this upcoming Sunday. And while it's still up in the air, there is one thing I know that's not up in the air, and that's what I think the Carolina Panthers should do with him moving forward. So I'm going to talk about that today. But first, I want to give you guys a quick reminder. This podcast, it's available everywhere you like to listen to podcasts. That's Apple's Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, or I mentioned iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, all of those places. Make sure to rate and subscribe on your favorite platform, as well as if you want to check out old episodes or my other podcasts, you can go to jacksonneillpodcast.com. So at the time of recording this, it's looking like it's a strong possibility that it's very likely that Kyle Allen will be getting the start for the Carolina Panthers this Sunday when they travel to Arizona to take on the Cardinals due to Cam Newton being injured. So this is just more injury news for Newton, who has had his fair share of troubles with injuries over the past several seasons and really throughout his career. This most recent one, it's a re-aggravated left foot sprain. He injured it back in the preseason, and now it's kind of getting re-aggravated and forcing him to possibly miss this week and maybe even more. We'll have to see, kind of how it plays out. But so far, it's been a pretty terrible season for Cam Newton. He's thrown for just 572 yards, no touchdowns, one interception, with a terrible 56% completion percentage. Add on to that the Carolina Panthers are 0-2, and if you look at, even though the Saints now are losing Drew Brees for several weeks, the Falcons, they still won. The Bucks, they beat the Panthers. It looks like the Panthers, there's a strong chance they might end up becoming the bottom dwellers in the NFC South. And at the very least, being 0-2, I think there's a less than 10% chance to make the playoffs when you get down that low early on in the season. So it's not looking good for Carolina in a year that people thought maybe they could compete for something. As of right now, it's looking like that is not very probable. So with this latest injury, Cam Newton is just adding on to this insane injury history. I mean, you look at him throughout his career, shoulder surgery this past offseason and a knee strain last season. There was a rotator cuff tear in 2016, a concussion in 2016, chest rib fracture in 2014, torn ankle ligaments in 2014. So there are a ton of injuries. There's even more from a little bit prior to that, but I just wanted to keep this within 5 years, basically. So all of those injuries, and some of these are serious. I mean, you look at rotator cuffs, stuff with knees, the shoulder surgery, especially for a quarterback. And when you look at all of that, it's kind of surprising to see that Newton hasn't really missed that many games. Last year's 14 games he played in before he got kind of shut down for the last two, that tied his career low. So he's played in 14, 15, or 16 games every single season of his career. But as you look at him now, as you look at him so far this season, as you look at how he's throwing the ball, how he looks out on the field, you can obviously tell that these injuries are taking a toll. And now, yes, he's possibly going to be out of the starting lineup, but it's not that tough to tell that these injuries are greatly impacting him as a QB. Now, he's never been that much of an accurate QB, and throwing the ball has never really been his strongest suit as a quarterback. It was really his rushing ability that set him apart from everybody else, and that's what's getting him injured. But now as we look at these injuries, we look at these injury history, we look at how he's continually suffering a lot more recently, that shoulder surgery, the knee sprain, and now this left ankle or left foot issue he has right now, all within the past year, they're starting to mount up. They're starting to just add on to each other. And you're starting to see him not be able to throw the ball that well downfield. I mean, he wasn't a great downfield thrower to begin with in terms of accuracy or anything like that, but now it's getting abysmal, and defenses can kind of just press up on receivers, don't have to worry about the deep ball down the field, because not only does he not really throw it that accurately, but he's not getting a lot on it either. And you can see those injuries being the cause of that. And as you look at all of this history, as you look at how his career has gone so far, the big thing you have to circle right now is his age. Cam Newton is 30 years old. This is his age 30 campaign in the NFL. And he's already looking like a QB that is really on the downturn of his career, which, conventional wisdom, you think, 30, it's usually kind of when athletes face that downturn. Except for quarterbacks. I mean, we're in this age right now where, I know everybody plays at the whole Tom Brady's playing till he's, 42 right now, but even QBs like Drew Brees, I mean, he got injured recently, but that was kind of a freak injury. I mean, not many times are you throwing and your hand just happens to nail the hand of an onrushing defender. So it's kind of a fluke injury for him. He's still going strong, and he's 40 years old. Look at someone like Phillip Rivers, into his late 30s. Ben Roethlisberger, now he's gotten kind of beat up, but he's still going and playing. And into his 30s, Aaron Rodgers, he's in his late 30s. So it's becoming more and more normal nowadays for these quarterbacks to last well into 30 years old, and that even at 30 right now, a franchise quarterback, you're still looking at them like, okay, we're gonna probably get 7-8 productive years out of them. That's not that far off to think. However, with Cam Newton, that's simply not the case. This is the beginning of the end for Cam Newton. It's really obvious to see, and it's pretty hard to deny at this point, because when you get athletes who are so dependent on their athleticism, so dependent on maybe that quick first step. Think of players like that in the NBA or wide receivers like that. When they're so predicated on that athleticism, it's a steep and quick drop-off because when they lose it, it's gone. They can't come back from that. They have to completely change the way they play the game. And for Cam Newton, the way he plays the game is he's the size of a linebacker, and he's always been willing to absorb those hits and continually keep playing and get the short yardage rushing situations himself, and have defenses respect him running. Well, nowadays with these injuries, he simply can't be running around a lot, and because he's not going to be able to last much longer at his current rate. I mean, you see that so far in 2019. I mean, he has -2 rushing yards as of right now, which is something you would not expect from Cam Newton. You'd expect him to have maybe, close to 100, a little under 100 so far at this point in the season. He's had seasons of several seasons of over 700 rushing yards, and that's a lot for a QB, with double-digit rushing touchdowns in a couple seasons as well. So he's a QB that needs that rushing element. And with these injuries, he can't do that anymore. And when you say, okay, well, maybe he can switch his game. Maybe he can flip how he plays, and maybe he can turn into more of a pocket passer. I would look at that and I would say, okay, he's tried that. Look at last year's numbers. I mean, he had the best completion percentage of his career by far when he threw for about 68%. So he tried, and yet since he's already had all of these seasons, since coming into the league in 2011, of getting nailed, of getting hit constantly, it's looking like it's a little too late. Where, okay, now maybe he can try to stand back there in the pocket, but A, because he didn't develop those skills throughout his entire playing career, because he could count on his athleticism, his throwing from the pocket isn't that good, and B, he's already taken so many hits, it doesn't matter. He's already absorbed so many hits, and he's gotten so injury prone that it doesn't matter whether he becomes a pocket passer from now on, because he's only 1 or 2 hits away from missing entire seasons, from getting injured to the point of no return. So if you're the Carolina Panthers, you have to take stock of your organization. That this QB who, you can argue he's been a franchise QB, but outside of that one kind of like MVP season where he took him to the Super Bowl, really where have the results been? But at the very least, just a steady constant at quarterback for now close to a decade for your franchise. You have to look at Cam Newton and say, he's not part of this wave of QBs playing forever. He's simply not. He's not durable enough to do that. That 30 years old for Cam Newton is not equivalent to 30 years old even for someone like Russell Wilson, who's been able to use some rushing ability but use it to evade tacklers, not get hit more. Russell Wilson's going to be able to play for a lot of years. He's going to be able to go on and have a nice career well into his 30s because he's been able to really develop as a pocket passer. I mean, look at a lot of the young guys, whether you think about like someone like Patrick Mahomes or Jared Goff, a young guy who's not having too much success right now staying on the field. Carson Wentz, a player just like Cam Newton, who maybe doesn't run as much as Newton does, but Wentz's problem is more holding onto the ball. But even though he's just big like Cam Newton, you think he could absorb those hits. Well, I hate to break it to you, but he can't. He's missing tons of time. And that if he doesn't develop as that pocket passer, if he doesn't stop taking those hits, he's not going to have a long career. So if you're the Carolina Panthers, you look at your organization right now and you say that this season is not going to end well. That this season is only going to get worse from here on. You're 0-2. You play in a division where, the Saints are, up against a wall right now because Breeze is out. So there is that. But Teddy Bridgewater still is, I think, a competent backup. I mean, I still think he's a solid backup. Don't forget that he's had some good seasons in the NFL. And just overall, that's just a talented roster and a very talented offense. I mean, he's still handing the ball off to Alvin Kamara and has Michael Thomas to throw to. So you have the Saints in your division. You have the Bucs, who you just lost to, so that's going to be a tough division loss. And then even the Falcons, who, they've been really up and down so far this season. That first week looked terrible. This past Sunday night, they, got that win over the Eagles, so you don't really know what's going on with them. I'm looking at this division, I'm saying the Carolina Panthers don't really have a shot. And you're in this situation where you don't really have a shot in your division, and your QB is suffering injury after injury and not looking that good throwing the ball, seeing these injuries take a toll. And you have to say as an organization, it's time to move on. That after this season, it is time to move on from Cam Newton. Because his deal so far right now, he's under contract through the rest of this season, and then he's under contract for 2020 as well. But if they were to release him, he would just count as $2 million in debt, about $2 million in dead cap. That'd be a savings of about $19 million in cap space. But I think the real big reason why you have to cut Newton loose is that they have a superstar in the backfield. Christian McCaffrey is really, really good. And he's going to continue to be really, really good for the next several years. But if there's one position that has a dramatic fall off, it's running back. So if you're the Carolina Panthers, you got to say, okay, Christian McCaffrey is 23 right now. They have him on his rookie deal through next season and then an option in 2021. But 2022, they're going to need to re-sign him if they want to keep him, pay him a lot of money because he's going to be 26, entering the real prime of his career with already a ton of production. So when you look at that, when you look at this superstar you have in your backfield, you don't want to do a New York Giants where you get that great running back for them, Saquon Barkley, and then just completely screw it up by not having a viable QB or a viable team around them to make these great years useful. So as the Carolina Panthers, you have to look at Cam Newton and say, it's time. That he's had some success. Let's not act like he's had a ton of success. I mean, besides that one season, really, where are the results? But through these injuries, through the way he's not been able to change his game, and through the way they're taking a toll on his body and his numbers, I mean, come on. You have to move on past this season. If they stick with him any longer past this year, it's just going to hurt their franchise. And that the way forward has got to be, you got to get that young QB in this draft. You got to try to pair him with McCaffrey because you got to salvage this team in the best way you can. You got to make use of having that great running back because when you have someone like Christian McCaffrey, a great running back who you can hand off to as well as, catch passes out of the backfield, that's going to be something great for a young QB. You put a younger quarterback in that with somebody like McCaffrey who's going to be by the time that, let's say they draft someone this upcoming draft and they start him, week one, someone who has a running back who has 3 years NFL experience being one of the best at his position, that's only going to help that QB develop. And Cam Newton this is the beginning of the end. It's always better to cut people loose before they become terrible. I mean, I just mentioned the Giants with Saquon Barkley, but look at the Giants with Eli Manning. You gotta cut people loose before that drop-off hits. Maybe he will land somewhere next season and he will have a good bounce-back year. But are you really telling me that you think Cam Newton is going to be a productive NFL QB at 34, 35, 36, or even 33? I mean, he's 30 years old right now, and I don't see how he lasts another 2 seasons at his current rate. So for the Carolina Panthers, they've got to make a decision, and they've got to make it right after this season. And that'll do it for this episode of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to check this out on your favorite podcast platforms, rate and subscribe. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. For more episodes, you can go down to the show notes, visit jacksonneillpodcast.com to check out past episodes of this, as well as my interview series, Anything Goes, and my music discussion podcast. Anything Goes comes out on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the music discussion on Sundays. And if you're a really, really big fan of the show, if you just love my podcast, which I really hope you do, you can become a subscriber on Patreon. For there, just a couple bucks a month, or even $1 a month, you can get access to bonus content from the sports podcast and music podcast, as well as bonus questions from my Anything Goes interviews. So those are sometimes more fun than the actual interviews. We just talk about random topics. So go down into the show notes, check out that link to Patreon, because I write, I record, produce everything these podcasts all by myself, full-time college student. So any little bit of support for these really, really does go a long way. If you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JacksonNeill20. Today's music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all on Friday.